This question is a great example of how if you know the rules and you kind of start to sort them in a way that is a bit of a hierarchy where you're kind of like, I'm going to attack this first, it becomes very, very easy. This is a question that looks hard, but the first thing that you'd want to do is think about the semicolon. Semicolons, I've said this many times, have predictable rules. We need a sentence beforehand, we need a sentence after. The only exception is sometimes for very complicated lists, we're going to use semicolons to separate our items, but I don't see a list here. I don't see other semicolons, so it's not a list. It's definitely just about there being a sentence before and a sentence after. So let's listen, let's think about that. I'm going to start right here because I don't care about the sentence that's already over if I'm starting a new sentence. So let's just think about that. As Spivak points out, Sayville is not the protagonist of Shelley's novel. That sounds like a sentence. Sounds like I can end that right there, right? So part one, check. Rather, as the recipient, let me start that over. Rather, as the recipient of the letters that frame the book's narrative, she's the occasion of it. So I kind of stumbled there. It's a weird sentence, but here's the main sentence. She's the occasion of it. We have this kind of intro clause here. I'm going to highlight it in pink. Notice that there's a comma after the rather. That's pretty typical. And that's telling us we're kind of leading into something. And sometimes it's the main sentence, but the fact there's another comma later on is actually telling me this is an intro clause to another sentence that's attached to the first sentence with a semicolon. So yeah, you can have intro clause kind of in the middle of a big sentence because that big sentence might be multiple sentences in one. So I know it's confusing, but this is the benefit of thinking about semicolons is they force us to kind of break it down and really just take it piece by piece. So if we look at it, she's the occasion of it is a sentence. We have she as the subject, and then the verb is hidden with the word she's because it's she is. So this is very rare on the SAT. I guess they're doing this more with the digital test, using these kinds of contractions. But there you go. It's a very simple sentence. It doesn't have a lot of detail, but it's a sentence. So that means we're done. C is the answer. We have two sentences, we need to connect them in some legitimate way, and a semicolon is like a period. It lets us connect the sentences, or at least have two separate sentences next to each other. So nothing else here would work. The comma by itself is not enough. That's going to produce a run-on. You can probably hear as you just read it anyway that there's got to be a break of some kind between the word novel and rather. They're not flowing into each other. There's some sort of punctuation necessary. And then D is tricky because this is a legitimate way sometimes to insert the word rather into a sentence. It can happen. It's mostly when we're going to be interrupting a sentence with the word rather. So I'm going to change it a little bit to show you how we would do it. Basically, we would have the first sentence written as is. As Spivak points out, Sayville is not the protagonist of Shelley's novel. Okay, so novel and then period. Then what I would do if I wanted to use choice D is I would start it again with as. So as the recipient of the letters that frame the book's narrative, and then before I got into the main sentence, I would throw the rather in there, and then she's the occasion of it. So let me read the whole thing. As the recipient of the letters that frame the book's narrative, rather, she's the occasion of it. That would be a case where rather would have two commas. It sounds terrible to me. I don't like it, but this is sometimes how the SAT makes hard questions. They give us sentences that are weird and unusual and not the way that we would write them or say them, but they're grammatically correct. And so you've got to understand how these kind of weird transition words work with punctuation. Sometimes we put the semicolon before, sometimes after, sometimes no semicolon at all. We just use either a period or we use the two commas to throw it in the middle of a thought. So it's more working like an interruption in those cases. So don't eliminate any of them just because you think they look weird. You got to think about the overall structure of the sentence. And in this case, because we started with C and thought just about sentence structure with semicolons, we were able to get to the right answer without all this other stuff. So yes, I'm going on and on only to give you more detail, but this is a question where I would have gotten in 30 seconds by just looking at choice C, confirming that it is correct, and then moving on to the next question. So know the semicolon rules and be comfortable picking it if the rule checks out.